Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So, welcome back to Genesis. We are in chapter 34, a false love. You'll see that soon enough. The goal will be to get through all 31 verses this morning. This is lesson 43 in the series. We are tracking to finish early October. So, that looks like 14, maybe a little over 14 months in Genesis, so a little bit better than a year. Like, wow, that's a long time, Rich. I'll be honest with you, from my perspective, there's times I'm running so fast to finish. So, I mean, you may not feel like 14 months is very fast, but from my perspective, I feel like at times we're going very fast. There's just so much here, the genesis of everything. Imagine how confused you would be over the New Testament, many things you find in the New Testament without Genesis to explain why this is so. Okay, so last week we've been tracking, if we sort of replay the movie back just a bit, we've been tracking the 20 years that Jacob was in Haran. If you remember the event that started all this. It was that deception. It was his brother Esau who wanted to kill him. It was mom, Rebecca, going to him and saying, "Go to my brother, get you a wife, and I'll bring you back here soon, and everything will be fine. We'll just let Esau's anger cool off." Well, it's been 20 years. Mom's dead. Jacob not only has one wife, he has two and two handmaids. He has 11 boy children and at least one girl child that's named Dinah. So he has at least 12 children. And he is a very, 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 very wealthy man. God has richly blessed him. We saw the gift that he gave Esau, and it was 580 animals. It was a massive gift. If you remember, for the last 3 weeks up until last week, Jacob was certain that Esau wanted to kill him. He prayed, he divided forces, he tried to buy Esau, he did everything under heaven because he was certain the anger that Esau had when he fled to Haran was still there. And then last week, we read finally after weeks, they meet south of the Jabbok River. And we read, but Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept together. This was nothing like Jacob thought. This was more than he could have ever asked. He was hoping he could just live through the event. And he's been reunited with his brother. This is a homecoming he could never have imagined. This is a beautiful picture of forgiveness. This reminds us of how God has forgiven us. Not based on what we've done, not because we deserve it, but God has freely and graciously forgiven us. And it's a radical forgiveness. And that's what we see here as Jacob and Esau meet. Now, to put us back where we are geographically, so again, he had pushed back over the Jabbok River. He had reunited his family. He was headed south because Esau had been traveling for days up from Mount Seir, which is in this region right now. It's this mountain range right here. And so Esau is traveling this way. Shortly after he gets underway, so probably this general region right here, he meets up with Esau. And that's where we read that they weep. You know the whole story. Is like, who are all these people? What are all those animals I saw? We get the whole thing. Equally, it was there that Esau says, "Hey, I'll escort you back in the land." Jacob says, "No, thank you." Esau says, "Well, I'll leave some soldiers with you to escort you. They can walk at your speed." Jacob says, "No, thank you." And ultimately, Jacob says this: "Let my Lord," that's Esau, "pass on ahead of his servant Jacob." That's how he's speaking to him. "And I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children until I come to my Lord in Seir." Okay, so just a couple of points just to get us back in context. So he said, "Listen, the animals are tired. We've been fleeing from Laban. I don't want to push them too hard. Your soldiers will be traveling quickly. I have little kids with me. We don't want to push them too hard. We kind of pushed hard trying to get away from Laban. So we're just going to go on our own pace, but I'll see you in Seir. I'll meet up with you in Seir." So clearly, where's Jacob going? Seir, right? He's going south to look back at our movie. So if we were here, he's leaving this general area where he is right now, and he's going to travel south to Mount Seir. That's where he's headed. He's headed to where Esau lives. This is probably 70 miles or so it's a long trip. It's going to take time. He's going to travel slow, but that's what he says. Then, amazingly enough, John, good morning. We read in verse 17, but there's that conjunction, but Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the name of the place is called Succoth. He just looked at his brother and said, "I'll meet up with you in Seir. I've got to go slowly. I've got kids. I've got animals." He's a loving parent. He's a good shepherd. We get it. But for whatever reason, and we're not told, he doesn't go to Seir. He goes to Succoth. So he's in this general region right here. He travels just a few miles to the east. Excuse me, to the west. Thank you for whoever was thinking. I think you're pointing the wrong direction. To the west. Now he doesn't enter the promised land. He stays east of the Jordan Rift Valley. He goes east of the Jordan River. He doesn't technically enter the promised land, and he stops in Succoth. Now, why did he say, I'm going this direction, and end up going a very short direction that way? We're not told. Were the children tired? Were the animals tired? Was he limping? And his hip was just like, remember, he wrestled with the angel of the Lord. Let's be honest. Was he afraid? Was there something else that we're not accounting for? And I think John has a, did you have a question, John? Yeah, so the promised land goes like this. Yeah, so, and again, this is the eastern border of the promised land, the Jordan River. And again, you're looking at, this is the Sea of Galilee, this is the Dead Sea. And there, we would have thought he would have entered the promised land this way and headed to Beersheba or headed to Bethel, but he doesn't. He stops in Succoth. And not only does he stop in Succoth, to go back to the verse, he makes a house. And he builds booths for the animals. So he was in Succoth more than a minute or two. Again, I quoted Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, who says the rabbinic tradition that he was in Succoth 18 months. We don't know that. Tradition, just remember that. But he was there some time. He built a house, and he built booths for the animals. But then we ended last week. Ultimately, he left Succoth and went to Shechem. So he was in Succoth. He heads over the Jordan into Shechem. Now he is, whoever asked the question, John, it may have been you, now he is technically in the promised land. But that took some time. Again, he built a house in Succoth and built booths for his animals. But now, we ended last week, he is in the promised land. He is in Shechem. He is in the land of Canaan. It's not technically the promised land yet, other than God has promised it. It's the promised land in that sense. And so Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Padan Aram, that's the area of Mesopotamia, that's Haran, and he camped before the city. Like his dad and his grandfather, he's a nomad. He's living in tents. He's living outside the city of Shechem. The city of Shechem is a Hivite city. It is a Canaanite city. He is dwelling outside this Canaanite city with his extended family, which would be his 11 sons, at least one daughter, 2 wives, 2 handmaidens, lots of servants, tons of animals. He is a very wealthy man dwelling in tents outside the city of Shechem. And that's where we left Jacob last week, there in Shechem. Now, by way of reminder, just to get where we are in his timeline, he left Haran at 97. So we're somewhere after this event and before Joseph is sold into slavery when he's 108. So he's probably around 100 today. You're just wanting to get it in your mind. We don't know exactly. He's definitely older than that because he's been in Succoth for some amount of time before he came into Shechem. And we haven't sold Joseph into slavery yet. He's not that old yet. So he's probably around 100, just to sort of set that in your mind this morning. And that's where we come to. So you have the outline in your lesson. I'm not going to talk you through it this morning. I'm going to let this text develop before you. If you're not familiar with this text, let the full impact of it hit you. As we go through this, put yourself in the position, in the shoes of the people involved, and let the emotions, the raw emotions they would have sensed, let them become yours. Own them, because how you respond is really what this lesson is all about. Because we have what they did. The question is, if we found ourselves in a similar situation, what would we do? That's the question. And so that sets us up for this lesson. We're outside Shechem. We're in an area inhabited by Canaanites, to be specific, Hivites, and we'll develop that in a moment. Any questions before we get going? Okay, let's go. And again, this just shows you where Shechem is exactly. Again, I developed this last week between Mount Ebal, the Mount of Cursing, and Mount Gerizim, the Mount of Blessing. I told you that this is a historically, geographically rich city. And this richness develops over time. We only know it because we know the whole end of the story. But this is the city where Abraham built the first altar in the Promised Land, and it's where Jacob either rebuilt that altar or built a new altar last week to God, to Yahweh. We're coming to Bethel, and that's where Jacob had the encounter. That's where he renamed Luz Bethel, which means the house of God. Remember, that's where he saw God on the top of the staircase, and the angels were ascending and descending. And Linda, to tell you how close you are here, God is going to send him to Bethel next week. Too bad he didn't go in the first place. That's what you're asking. Why did he go dwell outside this Canaanite city? Why would that be a good idea? That's what you're thinking. You're probably right to think that. Verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. Seems to be very descriptive. At the jump, there's nothing here that would shock us or surprise us. She has 11 brothers. They live in a tent. She would likely want to meet some of these young Hivite girls that lived in the city of Shechem. They're probably very cultured. She's living as a nomad. I can picture how this would play out. She's probably has some relationship that's developing with some of these young ladies. By the way, in case you're trying to nail down how old is she, she's not older than 17. She's younger than 17. Theologians will say probably 13 to 16. So if you want to nail down where she is, she's a young teenage girl. And she's beginning to develop a relationship with probably some of the girls of the land, and that's what's going on. Now, Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum or Morris, I can't remember which one, the statement where it says she went out to see the women of the land, he says that's a very derogatory statement. It points to her doing things she should not have been doing. Here's where he gets it from. That phrase is only used twice in Genesis. The other place is with Rebekah when she goes to Isaac about Jacob, and she said, I loathe my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of these Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, there's that exact Hebrew phrase, what good will my life be to me? Maybe it is a negative connotation, or maybe it's just a statement of fact that she wanted some relationships with young girls her age. She likely had no daughters near her age. Jacob had other daughters. We know that to be sure. We'll see it in other verses in Genesis. She's the only named daughter, but they were much younger than her. So she probably, if you lived with 11 brothers as a young girl, you probably would want a relationship with other young ladies, and that's probably all that's going on here. Verse 2, looking at the first half. And don't get ahead of me, please, because I want this to develop in your mind. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, we'll stop right there. Okay, so a whole lot just drove by us. First, we see this guy called Shechem. He is the son of another guy called Hamor. He is a Hivite, and he is the prince of the land. So let's play this movie forward. Who in the world are the Hivites? Let's start there. Well, we're told clearly, if you remember back in Genesis 10, like you can quote that. Yeah. Okay, but in Genesis 10, we're told who they are. Canaan fathered Sidon, his firstborn, in Heth, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites, and the Girgashites, and the Hivites. So the Hivites descend from Canaan. Okay, we understand that. They're one of the nations that descend from Canaan. To look at it on a graph, you're thinking, wow, Rich, I can't look at that on a graph. Ham, well, let's blow this up. Ham, fathers, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. There's Canaan. Canaan has all of these sons, including the Hivites. So the Hivites are technically Canaanites. Fair enough. Now, when I say Canaanite, that should automatically, like a flashing neon light, should come on. You remember the story, Genesis 9. When Noah awoke from the wine that he had drank following the flood and knew that his youngest son had done to him, he said, cursed be Canaan. Canaan did not exist when this curse was issued. Ham existed. Ham had done something to him. We talked about it. I'm not going to reteach that lesson. Ham had done something to him, and he cursed Canaan, his son that was not yet born. Why? We said it at the time, because of the nation they would become. You see, Ham was evil. The Canaanites would become wicked and evil. Ham was a little bit of rebellion. Canaan was a lot of rebellion. You're going to see that begin to unfold today. You're going to see why God cursed those people, because they were the wicked people they would become. So God didn't curse them so that they became a wicked people. God, looking forward, cursed them because of the wicked people they would become. You will see that begin to develop today. So that's who the Hivites are. That's who the Canaanites are. That's where the Canaanites came from. And continuing to talk through who we're talking about here, equally, you'll see that this guy is a significant person. His name is Shechem. And the name of the city is Shechem. So the city was named after this boy. This boy is the son of Hamor, who is the king or the chieftain of the Hivites. Let me show it to you. Oh, Linda has a question before I show it to you.
Hold on.
And so the mic's coming. I'll show it to you, and then I'll go to you. We read this last week. From the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought, that's Jacob, for 100 pieces of money, the piece of land on which he pitched his tent. Hamor was the king or the chieftain of these Hivite people. He sold Jacob the land that he's got his tent on. His son Shechem is the prince. He is the next heir to the throne, or to become the next chief. He is an important, influential, highfalutin person in the Hivite nation. Linda.
A comment. Do you have the definition of Hamor out of Hebrew?
I do not. I'll tell you what I think it means, and you tell me if I'm wrong. I think it means donkey.
Amen.
I think it means he is a, but I'm not sure, but I think that's what it means.
You are 100% correct.
Okay, so
Ding,
thank
ding,
you.
ding.
Thank you, sister. So it does mean, now keep in mind, when we say that word, we mean it in a derogatory way. They meant it in a very positive way. The donkey was a very strong animal. So to be called that meant you were, Linda's looking at it, yeah, sure. But guess what? He's going to turn out to be that. You'll see it in a second. He's going to turn out to be all that and more. Okay, so he is an important person. He's an influential person. He's the next person in the chain of command. He's the next king or chieftain of this Hivite group that lives here in Shechem. That's who he is. Back to verse 2. And I know you didn't get ahead of me, so let's pick it back up. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw Dinah, he seized her, he laid with her, and he humiliated her. I told you a couple of things. The text today is descriptive and not prescriptive. I told you if I were going to skip any chapter in Genesis, it would be this chapter. What he's about to do is heinous and wicked and reminds us of why God cursed the Canaanite people. What you see develop after this heinous and wicked crime is even more wicked. And it reminds us of why God cursed these Canaanite people. And Sandy has a question.
Hold on, Sandy.
Okay, I'm sure you said this before I got in here, but I'm sorry I wasn't in the choir. But last week it seemed like the children were young.
She's
Yeah.
13 to 16.
Okay, and her brothers though, I thought they were kind of young too.
So they would be older than her. So they're in their early 20s, 18, 19, 20. They're young men. Older than her, she's young. She's the youngest of the group. She's not the youngest of the whole group. He's coming. Benjamin. But he's not here yet. You don't know about him. So hopefully that answers that question. But notice what happens. We get a clear description of what's going on. He saw her. So she's going in and out with these Hivite women, Sherry, right? I mean, they're young ladies, 13 to 16. This is common. Having a sleepover, playing tea, whatever, 13 to 16-year-old girl, playing Nintendo, whatever. I don't know. But he sees her. He begins to lust after her. But he goes beyond that. He seizes her. The idea in the Hebrew is he captures her. He steals her. That's the idea of the Hebrew. He overpowers her. He kidnaps her. He abducts her. That's not the end of the story. He lays with her. That's non-consensual sex. Clearly in the Hebrew, that's the idea, because look what comes next. He humiliates her. He defiles her. He forcibly rapes her. He humbles her. He afflicts her. Now, this is the prince of the Canaanite people, the Hivites, and he has just raped an Israelite teenage girl. That's the story. That is what's happening. And by the way, this is the first case of rape in the scriptures that I'm aware of. It is interesting as you think about that it is a Canaanite prince who rapes an Israelite teenage girl. But you see what's going on here. Verse 3. So he rapes her. By the way, as you're going to see this play out, it looks like he imprisons her in his father's house. So not only does he seize her, not only does he take possession of her, not only does he physically rape her, but then he holds her hostage. To use a modern vernacular, he falsely imprisons her in his dad's home. Verse 3. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spake tenderly to her. So what started out as lust that drove him to abduct and rape and hold this girl has now turned into a weird desire to marry her. So much so that Moses says he loved her. Now let's just pause for a minute. Let me say a number of things. In the Hebrew, there's one word for love. In the Greek, there's lots of words for love. In this example, This is not, to use Greek terms, this is not agape love. This is not that selfless love. This is not that love, 1 Corinthians 13, that gives. This is eros love, to use a Greek word. This is lust. This is a love that's driven by an internal passion. He lusted after her and he loved her. Because agape is the love that looks for the opportunity to give. Eros love is the love that looks for the opportunity to get. And that's what's happening here. He loves her in that sense. He wants her to fulfill his passion. He wants her to be his wife because she's beautiful. But if he had loved her, he would have never done this to her. Because let's be honest, moms and dads and grandpas and grandmas, as we talk to our daughters and grandchildren, if it involves abuse, he or she does not love you. That's not how love works. Agape is a love that gives, not a love that's always trying to get. And that's what we see here. But you see his soul is being drawn to her. He loves her, whatever that means in his mind. Verse 4 is this story could not get a little bit worse. So Shechem, the son, the prince, spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." Now you'll see this play out. It's clear that Hamor knows everything that happened. It's clear that Hamor knows that Shechem has seized this girl, raped this girl, and is holding this girl in his house. What is never said is one word by way of correction. There is not one hint of what have you done. There's not one hint of why have you done this. There's not one hint of we will march this girl back to her parents and we will try to explain ourselves to them. But rather, just the opposite. You're going to see this man begins to do everything he can to get that daughter for his rapist son and to cover over this crime like it never happened. And I would say, again, as you think about lessons for parents and grandparents, there's a good one. There's right and there's wrong. Start there. But Hamor, this Canaanite, and maybe in the Canaanite culture, this was quite fine. Maybe that's why they're so cursed by Yahweh, because of the people they have become. But you see what Shechem is doing. Dad, you've got to get me this girl. I've got to marry her. Okay, there's where we are in the story. Any questions?
Where are the 11 brothers?
The 11 brothers are out in the field, John. So John's question was, where are the 11 brothers? They're in the field and they are coming. And don't worry, you're going to get the opportunity to put yourselves in their sandals because they're on the way. Great question. They're coming. Verse 5. Now Jacob heard that he, Shechem, had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. Okay, parents and grandparents, put yourself in Jacob's sandals. You're at home, you're in your tent, your sons are all out taking care of your massive flock, likely thousands of animals. They're laboring out in the field, handling the sheep and the goats and the camels and all the donkeys and everything they're handling. And word gets back to you that your oldest daughter, Dinah, born of Leah, has been raped by a man in the land. Maybe even word comes back that she's being held captive right now. She has a question. What would go through your mind? What would you want to do? What would you be thinking? By the way, he's about 100 years old. And Deb has a question.
So it seems to me, as the way this sounds, like it happened over the course of a day, maybe two, because
Correct.
you would think if it went on for more than 24 hours, you'd be wondering where the heck your daughter was and you'd be out looking for her.
So she could have been asleep over at Joanne's place, right? But to go to your point, it would have been at most a couple of days. It wasn't like a month. It wasn't like, hey, has anybody seen Dinah? So it was a day or 2, 3 at the most. It happened pretty quick. Now, word comes back to Jacob. How would word come back to Jacob that his daughter's been raped? I can only imagine 2 ways. One, it's become such common knowledge in the city that it filters back. Or, Hamor is about to show up at Jacob's house. Hamor flatly tells Jacob that my son raped your daughter. That's the only 2 ways it likely happened. Put yourself in Jacob's shoes. I don't even want to be in those sandals, but he's in them. Let me say something. I said this to earlier in class in case I forget to say it. Men and women, Christian leadership is needed in chaos. It's not needed when everything's going fine. Leadership is not critical when the ship is running all ahead 2/3, everything's draining to the bilge, and everything's fine. Christian leadership is needed right now when chaos lands. And chaos has landed. And Christian leadership is going to be needed desperately here. And I would say the same is true for our day and age. This is when men and women as Christian leaders, we lean into it, not run away from it. Because that's when our thoughts, God's wisdom, is desperately needed. But you're in Jacob's shoes. What in the world would you be thinking? Whatever he's thinking, the one thing we know is he opts to hold his peace until his sons come in from the field. He opts to keep his mouth shut, to not go choke out anybody, to not do anything until his sons come in from the field, his 11 sons. And there's a question, I think, somewhere over here. Nan.
I think it's interesting that you bring that up because if we go back to the very first verse where you said the women of the land is a negative connotation, why would Leah even let her daughter go with them?
And those are the questions we ask. Why did the parents allow this? Why did she want to do this? And we probably find our answer, and Teresa has a question, in some of the things that we deal with as parents and grandparents when our children want to do things that maybe they shouldn't do.
Well, based on
Why was she not escorted?
Well, based on that, and then the way the boys behave, you kind of wonder if there's a little lax as far as control, maybe.
Those are all things we play in our mind, right? How did we get here? And if you were Jacob, those would be the questions you'd be asking yourself right now. Why did I ever move outside this city? Why did I allow my daughter to go there unescorted? Why? It's too late to answer those questions. Now it's only time to be a Christian and lead. Teresa.
Are you sure she didn't have servants or somebody following her? Maybe she wasn't alone. It's just not stated, because wouldn't have that been the practice?
She could have easily been escorted, Teresa. We
By
for
servants,
sure
and they
we
just
don't know.
don't say anything?
And the servant could have been one that came back
Yeah,
and
that's
told
what I'm
Jacob.
thinking.
Absolutely. That could be the case. Because we clearly see that Jacob learns about it. What we don't know is how he learned about it. So absolutely, Teresa. Could easily be the case. But clearly we see what's going on. Verse 7. So he's going to keep his peace until the sons come in from the field. Okay, it's time to role play. You can't be Jacob anymore. You get to be one of these four people. Let's go with Reuben, Simeon, Levi, or Judah. Those are the four older brothers of Dinah, same mom, Leah. You just are about to learn that your sister has been raped. Your younger sister than you has been raped by a man of the city. You're coming in from a hard day's work with goats and sheep and everything else. Here we go. The sons of Jacob coming from the field, as soon as they heard of it, as soon as they heard what had happened, as soon as the word filtered back to them, the men were indignant and very angry because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. So ultimately, however they learn, they're coming back and they learn what's happened with Dinah. They learn what Shechem has done. They learn about this crime and they become indignant. The Hebrew word means they become grieved. They become vexed. They become hurt. They become tortured. We get it. If that was your sister, her pain would become your pain. That's your little baby sister, and all of her pain would be yours that moment. They are indeed indignant. But notice next, they are very angry. Much, abundant. Now, many times, this is an example where the English fails to capture the Hebrew. They are very, and then the Hebrew word here means hot. They are furious. They are burning with anger. That's what the Hebrew tells us. They are on fire. Their little sister has been raped. They are flat out burning with anger. Now, let's pause. There is a righteous anger. And no doubt when our sister is raped, we should lean into that righteous anger and we should demand justice. And we should see justice run its full course. But there's an unrighteous anger that we need to be very careful with. because it will eat our lunch. It will take us to places we never want to go. And so we understand. Men, I suspect every one of us in here, if we were to drop ourselves and this was our little sister, we could take the Hebrew words. He was very angry, and rightly so. But we need to be careful with that type of emotion as it plays forward in our life and make sure that it's a very righteous anger that's wanting justice for the innocent. But you see what's happening. They are very angry, and rightly so. They go on to say, this is an outrageous thing. The word here is it's a disgraceful thing. This is a profane thing that this man has done in Israel. This is the first time ever Jacob's new name is applied to the family. And it's not just applied to the boys. It is applied to Dinah, the girl. What Shechem has done is an outrageous thing in Israel. This fledgling nation that God is birthing, what he has done, what this Canaanite prince has done, is outrageous, and it should have never been done. And that's what Moses tells us, and of course that is absolutely correct. So hopefully you're beginning to comprehend, beginning to feel Jacob's emotions. You're beginning to feel Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah's emotions, one of those guys. You're in the moment. Any questions before we advance the story? Descriptive and not prescriptive. But leaders sometimes find themselves in rough positions and they have to lead there. Verse 8. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Now, this whole time, there's no hint that Hamor is sorry. There's no hint of repentance. There's no hint of, I am so sorry for what my son has done to your daughter. This is tragic. I mean, this is sickening, and I'm sorry. And I don't know how we get out of this, but please forgive me, and please forgive my... There's none of that. There's this whole drive for Hamor to get what Shechem wants. And moms and dads and grandparents, is a good lesson there too, right? He is totally out of kilter. He is so concerned with what his son wants and not concerned with the crime that has been executed upon this young lady. Something I want you, you're not going to see it for a little bit, but I want you to know it now. I don't want to bury the lead. Not only is Hamor there talking to Jacob, not only is Hamor there talking to Jacob, and now the 11 sons have come in from the field, and we're about to see that Jacob is not going to say another word. Jacob is going to be like out of the picture. Jacob is not even going to understand the plan and the ruse that's developing. We wonder where Jacob is when he's needed. He's going to be silent. But guess who else is there? You're going to see it in a few verses. Shechem is there. Shechem is there the whole time. As you put yourself in these men's sandals, not only are you talking to Hamor and he's saying all this stuff and you're wanting to choke him, the rapist is standing right next to him. That's where you are this morning. Dinah's locked up in his house. Yeah, everybody's eyes kind of, yeah, that's right. Okay. Back half of verse 8 and we'll go to verse 9. Please give her to him to be his wife. As you think of insensitivity, Linda, the way your face captured it, like, are you in another time zone? I mean, what are you talking about? He is so focused on my boy just needs her to be his wife. And he is pretending like none of this has happened. Verse 9. Here's the plan. We'll make marriages. You can make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us and take our daughters for yourselves. You see what he's saying? Hey, let's join up together. We can become one people. It'll be the Hivite Israelite nation. You give our daughters, we give our daughters, everything will be fine. I would remind us what God thinks about this. God has been crystal clear not to marry those Canaanites. Let me show it to you when the nation of Israel comes out of the promised land. A number of verses, I just want you to sense God's heart on this whole deal. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it and clears away many nations before you, Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, there we go, Jebusites, 7 nations more numerous and mightier than you. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction. You shall make no covenant with them and you shall show them no mercy. you shall not intermarry with them. God has already spoken on this whole deal. He's been speaking to the patriarchs. This is what he tells Israel later. The idea of combining nations is off the table as far as Jacob is concerned, or should be off the table. That's fine, but it's on the Hivite table. They're like, hey, we can become one people. He goes on in verse 10. You shall dwell with us, and the land will be open to you. Dwell and trade in and get property. We'll just become like one people group. We'll absorb you into the Hivite nation. Keep in mind, what he's offering is he's offering the chance of citizenship. You don't have to live in a tent on the outside of the town. You can move right in. You can become like a Hivite. We'll freely trade. You take our daughters, we'll take your daughters. Now, he doesn't have a lot of daughters, maybe some servants. But you see what the offer is. Fruchtenbaum points this out. He said this: ancient records show that the land of Canaan was comprised of city-states, like Shechem, with nomads around the periphery who hoped to become citizens of those city-states. This is a great deal he is offering Jacob. This is a chance to become part of the nation. What's that? They're illegals. But guess what? God has promised that all this land I'm going to give to your descendants. You may be illegal today, but I promised all this to you. And you see, Jacob, these sons could have easily said, hey, this is a great deal. We'll do it. That's not what they're going to do. And I would just remind us, a point by application, the world does this with us all the time. Just set aside this belief, compromise on this position, and you can join us. And life will be better for you. You can buy and trade, and life will be a lot easier for you and better for you if you'll just compromise at a couple of these points. That's the offer. Just a few compromises and you can join us. And again, we're faced with that offer every day, or at least not every day, most days. Verse 11. Shechem also said, you see, the boy had been standing there the whole time. The whole time Hamor is talking to Jacob, Shechem's standing there. The 11 boys come in from the field. Shechem is standing there. And now Sandy's like, pow. After the deal has been cast, Shechem decides he's going to sweeten the pot. Going to throw in some sugar into the pot. And listen what he says. Shechem also said to her father, Jacob, and to her brothers, all 11, let me find favor in your eyes. Like you showed favor to our sister? That kind of favor? Or some other kind of favor? The audacity of this young man standing in front of the brothers and the father of the girl he has raped. Let me find favor in your eyes. I don't know, man. You wonder at what point do you jump and choke him out? That might have been the point. I don't know. But you see what he's saying, just so insensitive, so cruel. Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give. Ask me for as great a bride price and a gift as you will, and I will give you whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife. Name your price. Name your amount of land. $1,000? $100,000? $1 million? 10 acres? 100 acres? Name the price. Shechem says, I will pay it. Just give her to me to be my wife. Of all the things we will ever read in the scriptures, this young man's behavior is both sickening and shocking, as he is running right over all of his sin, this unrepentant rapist, in trying to buy this young lady's hand.
This sure sounds a lot to me like so many things that are going on in our society today, with the corruption and the people buying out others. Just do this and I'll give you that. You'll become wealthy. You'll become a millionaire. Just do this.
Just overlook
All this
that.
blackmail. It sounds just like it.
It turns out there's nothing new under the sun. I read your mind, Laurel. Thank you for that. And you see, he says, hey, whatever the bride price is, you name any bride price you want and I'll pay it. And we've talked about the bride price multiple times. If you flash back to Jacob, he paid a significant bride's price, 14 years for Leah in Rachel's hand. But here, young Shechem is like, name it, and I'll pay it. Okay, so here we are. I don't know whose sandals you're in for the moment, but put yourself there. What are you thinking? Any questions before we advance the story? Yes, Martha. Is that Martha?
Hold on,
I think it's
Martha.
All I can see is yes, Martha.
This is a big room. It takes me a long time to get.
It is a beautiful room. We praise the Lord.
Yeah, this is not so much a question, but it's just a follow up on Deb's point. And this application that you put here just hit me so hard because just in the 3 years that John and I have moved over here to this area, in just realizing how much has changed and become so much more apparent in our own country, let alone the world. And I am just telling you today, we are so thankful to be back in a church that is not ashamed of the gospel. It's not ashamed to preach the
Amen.
gospel. It's not ashamed to live out the gospel.
Amen.
It's not ashamed to teach us the gospel.
Amen.
And when we look and we see what's going on, the one thing we do have is the hope in Him who's going to take care of us. Because when you look at this application and you see what's going on, and to your point, being bought off here or there, or allowing those who have done wrong to go free and to be about us, and the compromises that even we make sometimes as Christians, it's just hit home that we are so thankful to be where we are because we are growing again in the Word, and I'm thankful for that. For you, Rich, and for Zach, and everyone here in this church gathered that lives out the best they can the Word.
So two things, Martha. I join you in being very thankful to be part of this church. Very thankful to be part of this small group, of this larger group. Very thankful to be a truth seeker among the members of First Baptist Fernandina. And I'll give you my only desire at this point in my life. I'm getting ready to hit 60 years old. My only desire. Yeah, I know you do. Baby, he's a child.
We remember those days.
Remember those days. Whenever the Lord should come back or I go to meet him, however the movie plays, I want to be in full stride. I want to be running for him. I want to cut the tape fully extended. Whether he comes or I go to meet him, that's my only desire, Martha. That's it. A lot to learn here. So verse 13. So we see the plan, we see what Hamor has said, we see what Shechem has said, they're trying to be bought up. It's rather sickening. The whole thing is, verse 13, remember, descriptive, not prescriptive. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully because he had defiled their sister Dinah. Okay, so what Moses has done is he's sort of given us an advanced lead on what's really going on here. We're going to see it in a moment, but they're carrying out a ruse. They're acting with trickery. They're acting with deception. They're laying out a plan. They're deceiving Hamor and Shechem. You'll see how it develops. Moses kind of leads and gets in front of his skis a little bit by telling us, but we see that somewhere in the negotiation, Jacob has become silent. He's not saying a word. These boys are negotiating, but they're negotiating in deception. They are launching a counterfeit counterattack. A counterfeit counter-proposal. They're acting in deception. Now, to go to the point about Jacob not talking anymore, about all of the negotiation beginning to happen now with the 11 sons, Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum says this, quote, the brothers took the lead in the negotiations, which was not unusual in that society. Earlier in the book, Laban took the lead for negotiations for Rebekah. Of course, that is true, but Bethuel didn't divorce himself from the negotiations. It wasn't like you stopped hearing from him. He was still there and he still talked. Here, Jacob is gone. Here we don't hear what Jacob says. We don't hear what Jacob thinks. We don't hear anything from Jacob. And these boys are able to launch a secret ruse and Jacob doesn't even know about it. So the best hint is if he was there, he was wearing earplugs, or he wasn't there. Because these boys are able to launch a secret plan and he knows nothing about it. It's almost like either he's so distraught or so angry or so whatever that he just leaves, leaves the negotiation, or steps away, or does whatever. We don't know. Now, somebody raised their hand in my. Let's just say I saw a hand
Hold
kind of
on,
flash
Linda.
while I was talking.
Just in reference to Rebecca, she did have a choice.
She did. She wasn't raped. No, this is a totally different deal. That's right. And in the end, she made the choice. Her mom and dad, brother rather, wanted to keep her to stay longer, and she decided to go. Absolutely right. Verse 14. So they, that's the brothers, said to them, that's Nahor and Shechem, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace for us. So they say, listen, we are a circumcised people. We are a covenant people. We're Abraham entered into, but you know, they don't say any of that. They don't say anything about Yahweh. They don't say anything about God. They don't say any of that. They just say it would be dishonorable for us to marry you, for our daughters to marry you because you're uncircumcised. They say nothing about Yahweh. They say nothing about the worship of the true and living God. It boils down to you just simply need to be circumcised. The reason, because this is a rouge, because this is a plan, because they're launching a counter-offensive, and they're doing it with the mark of the covenant that God gave Abraham. So that we don't cast blame too far wide here, that is blasphemous. Shouldn't shock us, though. We live in a day and age where we see holy people say blasphemous and do blasphemous things. But this is blasphemy. This is a total misuse of the mark of the covenant. We won't look at that. We're out of time. But we understand it was given to Abraham. Another point here before we leave that verse. So clearly, they've been maintaining circumcision since Abraham. Clearly, Isaac circumcised Jacob and Esau. Clearly, Jacob circumcised his 11 sons. And here they are going, you got to be circumcised, dude, or this ain't going to work. Now, again, it's a rouge that this is not their plan, and you'll see their plan in a moment. Verse 15. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are, by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. You see, they're like, not only do you need to be circumcised, Jack and Jim or whoever, but every male in the city needs to be circumcised. Not just Shechem and Hamor, every male. That's the only way we'll do it, because that's the only way we can take your daughters and exchange daughters. That's the only way we can do it. Now, again, God would have nothing to do with this, but you ready for this? They're not doing that. They've got a totally different plan. They're not planning for Shechem and Hamor to get any daughters either. You're going to see what their plan is here in just a moment if you don't know it already. But you see what they're offering. They're looking at these two men and saying, hey, we'll do it. You don't have to pay a big bride's price. You don't have to give land. It's not going to take $100,000 or $1 million. Just all the men have to be circumcised. That's it. Bang, we're in. We'll move in. We'll marry, intermarry, we'll trade, we'll do everything. We'll become the Hivite Israelite nation. It's ready, set, go. That's never their plan. It's definitely not God's plan, but that's their rouge. Verse 17. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, all of you, then we will take our daughter and we'll be gone. By the way, that's our daughter who's still in Shechem's house. That's our daughter who's still under lock and key under you two people's house. But you see their point. You have one option here. If you want your little plan to play out and Dinah to become Shechem's wife, here's the only way it will work. This is odious to us that you're not circumcised. All the men of the city must be circumcised. It's a deal breaker. But if you do that, we're in. We'll do it. We're all in. That's where we are in the story. It's a rouge, but we wouldn't know that other than Moses gave us the little hint, or we've already read the story. Any questions before we advance the story? Nan has a question.
I was just going to say, it kind of looks like the family trait's gone all the way down to the sons.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else? Oh, Kristen has one. Don't run off more. You're real close. Yeah, you're real close. You're almost there.
Is there a reason it says our daughter and not our sister?
I don't think so. I could look at the Hebrew there. I don't think so. I think it's referring, just collectively, she's our daughter and her sister. So I don't think, I'll look at it though, if somebody write that down for me. I don't think so though. Anything else? Verse 18. Their words, that's the words of the 11 sons. That's this plan to, hey, no money, no bride's price, good news, just got to be circumcised. Their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, his son. To state this differently, here's what they did. Wow, that's a good deal. That seems reasonable. We'll do it. We'll do it. Yes, we'll do it. It was a reasonable plan. It was an easy plan. It was an inexpensive plan. I would just remind us. There's a way that seems right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. We don't dictate our life by what seems right or seems reasonable. We dictate our life by the Word of God. Obviously, these men are dictating their life by what seems reasonable and what seems right and what's inexpensive, what saves us the most money. That's not how we dictate our life, though. And what's happening here is a trap is being set. The cheese is being put in the bait. The hammer is being pulled backwards. And these two men said that seemed, the king and his prince son said, this seems reasonable. This seems good. We'll do it. Verse 19. And the young man, that's Shechem, did not delay to do this thing. It's almost like he dropped his pants on the spot and said, I need someone right now. Let's seal this deal right this minute. He is moving quickly to seal the deal to get Dinah. This is everything he's wanted. This is his dream come true. This is since he lusted after her, since he seized her, since he raped her, since he imprisoned her. This is what he's been driving at. And he's ready to circumcise me now. Let's get this puppy, let's get this train going. That's where he's at. Because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all of his father's house. Wow. Wow. It's a good thing we didn't run into the least honor. You see why God cursed these Canaanite people? This is the most honored of his father's house, who just raped this teenage girl, who's been unrepentant throughout this storyline. That's the nation we're dealing with. That's why God cursed them. Verse 20. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of the city. Now the gate of the city is where all official business happens. We saw Lot in the gate of the city in Sodom. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of the city. They spoke to the men of the city, and here's what they said. These men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. So they lay out this whole plan. Now, what should be in your mind? Go ahead and put yourself in the shoes of a Hivite. Put on your Hivite sandals. Well, what's the win for me? What do I get out of this? Why am I bringing another nation? Why are we doing this? They can stay on the peripheral. We're the city-state here. Why am I bringing them in? How many girls does he have that we're going to take as wives? I mean, what are we talking about here? Why would I even be interested in bringing them in? That's what the Hivite men had to be thinking. This makes no sense. Don't worry. Hamor and Shechem are going to make all the sense in the world out of it. Verse 22. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us and become one people, when every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Put your Hivite sandals on. What would you say right now? No, thank you, I'm trying to quit. Right? Oh, no, thank you. So I'm going to get nothing out of it but a circumcision as an adult male at 60 years old? Let me think about that. No. No, thank you. No way. No how. King, I like you and I like your son. It ain't happening. Number next. You see, there's no win for the men, but don't worry. Hamor and Shechem have been saving the win. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I a slide behind? You guys got to tell me that. But don't worry. Shechem and Hamor have been saving the win. They've been saving the big win for last. This is how they're going to seal the deal, and you're going to see it there in verse 23. So they've laid it out. We're going to bring them into the extended family. We're going to get circumcised. All the men would be like, I don't think so. Then he says this, Hamor and Shechem, will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them and let them dwell with us. All of Jacob's animals, those thousands of animals you see dwelling out in the field there in that piece of land that we sold him, over time, it'll all become ours. It's greed. It's covetousness. It's the love of money. It's the love of stuff. It's the undoer of men. And it undoes them. The cheese is in the bait. They had no interest. They would have been like, no, thank you, I'm trying to quit. Oh, you mean I can have all of his animals? Those thousands of animals I see grazing. You know, circumcision at 60 probably isn't that bad. It's not, I mean, how bad can it hurt? How long can it take? And there's the real pitch, and there's the danger. You can picture it now. He said, listen, it's just a little pain now, but great gain later. Paul said it this way to Timothy. He said, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and have pierced themselves with many pangs. You see, this was greed, and this was covetousness, and this was the love of money. And not only does it destroy the natural man, it ruins the spiritual man too. It brings destruction into his life too. That's why Paul's warning Timothy as a young man of God, flee from these things. Free from loving stuff, because it'll destroy you, it'll ruin you. Verse 24. And all who went out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised who went out of the gate of the city. You can picture this. We don't know how many people were in the city. We don't know if it's 20 men, 40 men, 100 men. It was some decent-sized city, this Shechem. And as the word swirls, they're all going out to the gate and hearing the pitch from Hamor and Shechem, hearing about how, look at all those animals. You can have some of those. And to the man, every one of them is circumcised. Every one of them wants a piece of the action. Everyone is like, sign me up. I can get some of those sheep, some of those goats, some of those camels, some of those donkeys. Sign me up, I will do it. And to the man, they are all circumcised. Any questions before we advance the story? They're all circumcised. Gina has a question. And you just walk right by. Oh, it looked like you walked by her. My parallax is off.
So it says they went out of the gate of the city. So is it the assumption that Jacob's people are the ones that are doing the circumcision?
I don't know. I don't think so. I would picture they're doing it to themselves. I don't know, though. It's a good question, Gina. I haven't even thought about it. So they're leaving. I see them going to the gate to hear the deal. Then they're going and getting it done. Now, I don't know how you do that in Shechem. I mean, hey, dude, if you do me, I'll do you. I mean, yeah. And some things we probably don't want to know. So we'll just go with this. Every man was circumcised. Now, as adults, when we circumcise a child, it's uneventful. It's like cutting the tail off a small dog. When you do it as an adult dog, okay, maybe not a good example. Maybe not cutting the tail off. Maybe nipping the tail.
Do you have dogs, Rich?
I had a little one. You know, and so I don't want to. So we cut the. We did not do it. Our little Jack Russell Terrier. They cut her tail off with a pair of scissors when she was a puppy. They just took her, cut it right off. Now, as they grow up to be a full dog, blood starts flowing heavy to that tail, and you cut it, it bleeds all over the place. But as they're a puppy, it's a very easy surgery. You can do it with a pair of household scissors.
Eric, do you want to speak to this? That was your field of study, wasn't it?
Eric, do you want to talk to this?
He was a doctor.
So at any rate, we see that all of them were circumcised. Verse 25. I'm going to get out of this as quickly as I can here. Okay. So all the men are circumcised. Moses tells us on the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the males. The second and the third born of Leah's sons took swords. They may have taken servants with them while the males were sore, weak, and nearly incapacitated, and executed the plan they had always planned. This was the plan they planned in the beginning. This was what they planned to do the whole time. Get them laid up from this circumcision, and they'll be unable to defend themselves. And we can go through this like a knife through butter. And they killed every man. As the city was feeling secure, they wiped all the males out. This is the second and the third born of Leah of Jacob. Now, so don't bury the lead. I want to say something right now. How much time do I have? I'll say it quickly.
You've got 6 minutes.
Ever wonder why Judah, who's the fourth born son, is the son who the Messiah will come from? Why isn't it the firstborn son? Why isn't it the second-born son? Why isn't it the third-born son? Tuck that away for now. Let's keep going. Just wanted to get that out there. Okay, so we see what's going on. Simeon and Levi go on a murderous rampage and they kill every man that's in the city. Verse 26. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, and they took Dinah out of Shechem's house, who had been there for days, maybe a week. We don't know what she's been thinking. We don't know what she's been going through. We don't know anything that she's endured at the hand of this whole event. Only that Hamor and Shechem are now killed, and she is taken out of their house, and she's been there for at least 4 days. Oh, verse 27. The sons of Jacob, now notice, we were talking about Simeon and Levi, the second and third born sons. Now we're talking about, verse 27, the sons of Jacob, the 11 sons of Jacob, all of the sons of Jacob. Simeon and Levi are the ones who killed all the men. The sons of Jacob now come together upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks, their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field. All their wealth, all their little ones, all their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. Just a couple of things by quick observation. You have to develop these in your mind as you puzzle through this. The rape of Dinah was a horrific crime and demanded justice. What Simeon and Levi have done is well beyond justice. They have killed innocents, and many of them. They have allowed their anger to take them much further than it ever should have taken them. They have killed every man, and now they've taken captive every woman and every child. That's where their anger has taken them. And that's where anger unchecked always takes us. There's so many verses in the Bible. I'll be fast. Whosoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly. Refrain from anger, forsake wrath, fret not yourself, it only tends to evil. There is an anger that is righteous. Don't step beyond that place. They have stepped well beyond that place. A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. There is a righteous anger, but there is an unrighteous one. And then finally, James would say it this way: the anger of man never produces the righteousness of God. And I would just remind us, there are times that we should be angry, a righteous anger. Be careful with that emotion. Be very careful, because it can take you to a place you never wanted to go and get you involved in things you never would have otherwise been involved in. Grace has some.
When God gave Moses the law, what was the consequence for a man raping a woman?
Murder.
Murder.
Be put to death. And they should have demanded justice for Shechem and Hamor, right? The guy who did it and the after the fact compliant guy who was with him. But we see what's going on. They've used circumcision, and now they've wiped out the entire city. Our last few verses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few. And if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. Jacob finally talks, but he doesn't address the issue. He doesn't address the sin. He doesn't say, what have you done? What you've done is more heinous than what was done to us. You've not asked for justice. You've taken the way the world does things. You get a pound, I want 1,000 pounds. And he's worried not about the morality of what they've done, but what you've done is going to cause consequences upon me and my family, upon us. What you've done is going to bring the Perizzites and the Canaanites upon us, and we're just a small clan. They're going to wipe us out. What you've done has resulted in the destruction of the Israelite nation. Now, good news, we're going to see God is not going to allow the Israelite nation to be destroyed in spite of their folly, in spite of their sin. And it's true for you and I too, isn't it? God's not going to allow us to be destroyed either if we're children of God, even when we sin. In spite of our folly, the same is going to hold true. So we don't live too far away from the story. It's just that this is so shocking. But we'll see what God does to protect the fledgling nation of Israel next week. But leaders, I would remind us, Jacob was needed desperately this whole story. His wisdom, his experience in walking with Yahweh was needed this entire story. And he was nowhere to be found until it was all over. And then his wisdom was folly. So for all of us, when we find chaos swirl in our life, may we lean into it as spiritual men and women. May we bring the Bible alongside as the wisdom of God. And may we apply that to the situation. May we not operate out of what we think is right or what we feel is right, but what God says is right. And if we're not sure, keep reading, keep praying, keep digging. But that's what's happening here. This entire city has been wiped out. Verse 31. So you see the charge against Simeon and Levi. You see what he says to them. Look what they say back to him. But they said, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? They're right. They're absolutely right. What Shechem did was heinous. What Hamor and Shechem did was more heinous. Then they came and tried to buy them off, and to accept money would have been to say our sister is nothing more than a prostitute. They were dead on right, but they were wrong in everything they did. Right, but wrong. One more observation. There's a number of things here. We'll see next week how God protects his family, but what's really interesting to me, El, the short abbreviated form of God, Elohim, the longer abbreviated form of God, Yahweh, Lord, Adonai, Lord, none of those names are mentioned in chapter 34. God's name is not mentioned in any form in chapter 34. Chapter 35, God's name will be mentioned 11 times, El and Elohim, and cities will be named that have God's name in them 11 times to make a total combined mention of 22 times in the next chapter. Not one time in chapter 34. What we have is a description of what they did and not a prescription of what we should do. But we will find ourselves in similar problems. That's when spiritually we've got to lean into it.
Don't you find it surprising that Jacob had no idea this was going to happen?
He divorced himself of the whole thing. It's almost like when the sons came up, what I picture in my mind, Brenda, is he just walked away. And I don't know if he was so wrong. I don't know. But they were negotiating and scheming and planning, and he didn't even know about it. Somehow this happened without him knowing until it happened. Teresa.
The other picture that I could see of Jacob is that he could have, like when they tear their clothes and they grieve because they are going through so much, maybe he was just down on his face the entire time while everybody else was in action. Maybe he was actually getting on his face and oblivious to everything that way.
And Teresa, I believe for certain, if I put myself in his shoes, I would be crushed. My heart would be shattered. The breath would leave my lungs. I don't know if I'd be able to talk. But to go back to what I said, men and women, we're going to find ourselves in one of these. That's when you're needed the most. When your church finds yourself in this position, that's when your Christian wisdom and your leadership is needed the most. That's when we've got to lean in, and Pam has something. Behind you, Lord. Pam has something. That's when we've got to lean in and bring wisdom, God's wisdom, into the scenario and say, listen, I know what has happened. We can't fix that. Here's how we need to respond. We need justice. Here's how we're going to get justice. We need to walk through biblically what should happen. And those are not easy things, by the way.
This reminds me of David, because David, all the troubles with his kids and how he was kind of silent too. He didn't, and it makes me wonder why Jacob didn't, where David, I think maybe because he'd had his own sin maybe, but what about Jacob?
It's regret. And again, we don't know his heart, to go to Teresa's question. He could be lying on the floor, unable to breathe. But I would tell us it's going to happen in our life. It's going to knock our wind out. We've got to, by the Spirit of God and the power of God, stand up and lean in and lead.
Okay.
And Deb, you get the last question.
We need, no,
Oh.
she was not the first
Oh,
to
oh.
raise her hand,
Oh.
but you need to land the plane.
I'm landing.
We're out of time.
I'm going to land the Deb. Can I skip you and save you the next week? I'm going to skip Deb, but this is the last question.
Yeah, it's just a comment.
Okay, good.
I think that these boys were kind of used to keeping things from his father, just like whenever they sold Joseph. And this whole time, he never knew about it.
And we're going to see that play out again, right? And we're going to see the characters, some of these, we're going to watch the characters, and I have to land the plane now, so I got to stop talking. We're going to watch the characters of these young men grow. And we're going to answer the question, why not Simeon? And why not Reuben? And why not Levi? And why did it make it all the way to Judah? We're going to see those answers develop in the coming weeks. But today, as we land the plane, descriptive and not prescriptive, a chapter that Rich would normally jump over, but let's be honest, there's a lot of wisdom here if we're willing to lean into it and not do those things. Let's pray. Father, a very tough